If you've ever watched Rick Harrison hold up a dusty old book with that half-hopeful, half-clueless look on his face, you already know what happens next. He picks up the phone, and a few scenes later, a calm, sharp-eyed woman walks into the gold and silver pawn shop and quietly changes the value of everything on the table. That's Rebecca Romney. For over a decade, she's been the person porn stars calls whenever something old, fragile, and possibly worth a fortune shows up in cardboard boxes and grocery bags. But most fans only know the 5 minutes of her they see on screen. The real story, how she got there, what she actually does, and why she never really left the show at all, is a lot more interesting than the edited version. Rebecca was born Rebecca Angeline Njit in 1985, and she's always been fairly private about details like her hometown and family. What she has shared is that she grew up in what she's called a reading family, a household of scientists who filled their shelves with science fiction. That detail matters more than it sounds, because it explains something people don't expect from a woman who spends her days authenticating 400-year-old manuscripts. Her first love wasn't rare books at all. It was genre fiction, science fiction, fantasy, romance, the stuff that rarely gets treated as serious literature. That tension between important old books and books regular people actually love to read would end up defining almost everything she built later in her career. Academically, Rebecca didn't train to be a book dealer because there really isn't a college major for that. She studied classical studies and linguistics, picking up a reading knowledge of languages like Latin, ancient Greek, and Old English along the way, on top of speaking fluent English, French, and Japanese. She even spent time living and working in Japan. It was the kind of background built for a career in academia or translation, not for pricing Civil War bonds inside a Las Vegas pawn shop. But Rebecca has been open about the fact that her entry into the rare book trade wasn't some grand plan. It was, in her words, being in the right place at the right time. That place was Borman Rare Books. In 2007, the well-known rare book dealership was preparing to open a new gallery in Las Vegas, where Rebecca happened to be living. She applied, got hired, and started working there right as the location opened to the public in early 2008. And here's the part a lot of people get wrong. Showing up with a classics degree didn't make her instantly qualified to handle Shakespeare folios and Newton first editions. She had to go back to school for it, enrolling in programs like the Rare Book School and the Colorado Antiquarian Book Seminar to build the specialized knowledge the job actually demanded. Things like collation, printing history, provenance research, and how to spot a forgery by studying paper stock, ink aging, and binding techniques. Within a couple of years, that extra work paid off. She was promoted to gallery manager in 2010, still in her mid-20s, running a business that regularly moved items worth tens of thousands of dollars. Her path onto porn stars wasn't a casting call or an agent shopping her around to producers, either. Rick Harrison already knew about Borman's Las Vegas gallery, and according to Rebecca, he personally reached out about featuring the shop on the show. Borman initially said no. Rick kept asking. By the time he came back around, Rebecca was already managing the gallery, and the company finally agreed. It's a small detail, but it says a lot. Rebecca wasn't hired to play a rare book expert on television. She was already the rare book expert, and television found her. She made her first appearance in Season 4, which aired in 2011, and it didn't take long for her to become a fixture. Fans started calling her the Book Lady, and for good reason. Nobody else on the show handled centuries-old paper with that same mix of technical precision and genuine enthusiasm. Over the years, she authenticated an extraordinary range of material. Shakespeare first folios, leaves pulled from actual Gutenberg Bibles, first editions of Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica and Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, and countless historical documents that range from genuinely priceless to cleverly faked. She said in interviews that her job on the show was never just about slapping a number on an item. It was about translating a genuinely complicated field for people who might feel intimidated by it, and making them excited about books instead. Not every appraisal ended in triumph, and that's part of what made her segment so watchable. There was the seller who brought in a copy of Richard Nixon's memoirs, signed by the former president himself, hoping the signature would make it a jackpot, only for Rebecca to explain that because it was a second edition, It was worth a modest couple $100, autograph included. On the flip side, there were genuine finds. A rare copy of Mark Twain's The Adventures of Tom Sawyer that sold for thousands, and an 18th-century military manual by Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben that she valued at $18,000. She's mentioned in interviews that she's personally priced books worth well over $100,000 during her career, both on the show and off it. One of the most talked-about moments involving Rebecca actually centered on Chumlee. In an early season, he spent $500 of shop money on a book he believed was signed by Charles Lindbergh, and the rest of the crew was convinced he'd been played for a fool. Rebecca stepped in to examine the signature, comparing it against verified examples and walking through how Lindbergh's handwriting had shifted as he grew older and more famous. Her verdict: it was authentic and worth roughly 3 times what Chumlee paid for it. It's the kind of moment that made her valuable to the show in a way that went beyond good television. She was genuinely saving the shop from bad decisions in both directions. Because Pawn Stars is reality television, viewers have always wondered how much of it is staged. Rebecca has actually addressed this directly, including during a Reddit AMA where she took questions from fans. Her answer was refreshingly straightforward. The items and appraisals were real, but production would tell her in advance what objects she'd be looking at so she could walk in prepared with accurate research, rather than improvising a 6-figure valuation on the spot. That's not the same as faking it. It's closer to how any expert would prepare for a consultation. She wasn't handed a script of what to say. She was given a heads up on what she'd be examining, which any careful appraiser would want anyway. Here's where the popular narrative about Rebecca tends to go off the rails. A lot of recycled online content claims she vanished from the show after some kind of scandal, often tied to a wildly specific story about a stolen rare book, an FBI investigation, and Rebecca being secretly questioned by federal agents. It's a great hook for a video, but there's no credible reporting anywhere that actually backs it up. No news outlet, no court record, no statement from history or from Rebecca herself supports that version of events. What actually happened is a lot less dramatic, and honestly, a lot more relatable. She got married and her career took her elsewhere. In 2016, Rebecca married author and researcher J.P. Romney. Through that marriage, she became distantly connected to the Romney political family, including Mitt Romney, the 2012 presidential candidate, and George Romney, a former Michigan governor. It's a connection people love to bring up, but Rebecca has been consistent in interviews that it's just that, a distant, in-law connection. She said plainly that she's never even met Mitt Romney. It makes for an interesting footnote, not a secret power structure behind her career. The marriage did change her day-to-day life, though. She relocated to Philadelphia, closer to where her husband was from, and shifted into a role handling Borman's central operations, including library acquisitions and catalog production, rather than running the Las Vegas gallery day-to-day. That's the real reason her appearances on Pawn Stars became less frequent starting in the mid-2010s. Not a scandal, just geography. Las Vegas is where the show films, and Rebecca no longer lived there full-time. Even so, she never officially left the show. She kept appearing periodically whenever she was back in Las Vegas, all the way through later seasons. And to this day, she's still credited as the show's rare book specialist, because she still is one. The Philadelphia move opened up a genuinely creative chapter for her. In 2016, Rebecca and JP launched a book-focused podcast together called Biblioclast, which ran for about a year. The following year, in 2017, they co-authored Printer's Era, Irreverent Stories from Book History, a collection of strange, lesser-known moments from the history of printing and publishing, stories about forged editions, copyright battles, and the messy human side of how books actually get made. It did well critically and commercially, and it gave Rebecca something a lot of reality TV personalities never get, a respected voice in print, entirely separate from her screen time. From 2016 through 2019, she worked at Honey and Wax Booksellers in New York, another respected name in the rare book world. During this same stretch, in 2017, she teamed up with fellow bookseller Heather O'Donnell to create the Honey and Wax Book Collecting Prize, an annual $1,000 award for women 30 and under who've built the most original, personally meaningful book collections, regardless of the collection's dollar value. The idea came from something Rebecca had noticed in the trade. Plenty of women were passionate, knowledgeable collectors, but far fewer were willing to actually call themselves collectors, a label that had quietly become coded as a hobby for older men. The prize was designed to push back on that, and it's been running for years since, backed by respected names in the book and auction world. In 2019, Rebecca took the biggest professional swing of her career and co-founded her own firm, Type Punch Matrix, alongside business partner Brian Cassidy, based in Silver Spring, Maryland. It wasn't a small antique shop. The inventory has included Shakespeare folios, individual Gutenberg Bible leaves, and rare science fiction and romance titles, reflecting Rebecca's belief that rare and important shouldn't only mean canonical literary classics. Around this same period, she was also featured in The Booksellers, a 2019 documentary about the rare book trade that premiered at the New York Film Festival, where one review memorably described her as one of the more delightfully obsessive characters in a film full of obsessive book people. She eventually settled in the Washington, D.C. area, where Type Punch Matrix is still based today. And in 2023, her marriage to J.P. Romney ended. She's continued to keep the Romney name professionally, and while fans occasionally speculate about the reasons, she hasn't made her personal life a focal point of a public work. The closest she's come is discussing the marriage briefly around the release of Printer's Era, and even then, the conversation stayed centered on the book itself. The most significant recent chapter in Rebecca's career actually has nothing to do with pawn shops at all. In February 2025, she published Jane Austen's Bookshelf, a rare book collector's quest to find the women writers who shaped a legend. The book grew out of a personal reckoning. Despite her academic training and years in the rare book trade, Rebecca realized she had barely read any of the women writers who actually influenced Jane Austen. Novelists like Frances Burney and Radcliffe, Charlotte Lennox, Charlotte Smith, Hannah More, Elizabeth Inchbald, Hester Lynch Thrale Piazzi, and Maria Edgeworth. These were women whose work Austen read, admired, and directly referenced in her own novels. The phrase Pride and Prejudice actually comes from a Frances Burney novel, yet almost all of them had quietly disappeared from the literary canon. Rebecca spent years tracking down rare, sometimes barely surviving copies of their original editions, reading them for the first time as an adult, and using her specific expertise as a rare book dealer to investigate not just what these women wrote, but why their work stopped being printed, taught, and remembered while Austen's endured. The book became a USA Today bestseller and a Washington Post Best Book of the Year, earning praise from outlets including the New York Times Book Review, the Wall Street Journal, and The Guardian, who called her approach sharp and instinctive. It's a project that shows the through line in Rebecca's entire career. She's never just been someone who assigns dollar values to old paper. She's someone who treats old books as evidence, clues to stories that history quietly decided to forget. So no, Rebecca Romney didn't disappear from Pawn Stars because of a scandal, a firing, or run-in with federal investigators. She built an entire career that simply grew bigger than one television segment could hold. She's still listed as the show's rare book specialist because she still shows up when she's in Las Vegas. In the meantime, she's become a best-selling author, run her own rare book firm, co-created an award that's opened doors for women collectors, and used her very specific, unusual expertise to dig up stories about forgotten writers that nobody else in her field was telling. The real untold truth about Rebecca from Pawn Stars isn't a cover-up. It's that the calm, sharp expert who spent 10 minutes debunking a fake signature on your TV screen was building something much bigger just out of frame the whole time.